Hello everyone and welcome back to Red Room Stories. I know many of you tune into these tales to help you drift off to sleep. So before we settle in, I'd love for each of you to leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, the sunset casting an eerie orange glow over the isolated village of Elderwood, a place forgotten by time but not by fate. Every resident seemed to sense it, that unsettling feeling lurking behind their eyes like shadows malignantly waiting for darkness to descend. Lena, an outsider come to research local folklore, felt the weight of their stares as if the villagers were one entity, a single gnarled fist poised to strike. The rumors of the Elderwood well whispered of prosperity and despair, of those who sought to make wishes and never returned. It was her first night, and the village lanterns flickered under a brooding sky, colliginous clouds swelling with unspoken dread. As Lena settled into the tattered old inn that had stood for centuries, the proprietor, a frail man with deep-set eyes, warned her of the night's curiosity. The village was cursed, he said, grieved by the fates of its lost children. Intrigued and perhaps a little skeptical, Lena dismissed his words as the ravings of a picturesque village steeped in tradition. She cradled her notebook, the pages eager to capture every detail, every story, every frightened glance between the villagers that spoke of something deeper than mere folklore. The sun dipped below the horizon, and an oppressive silence enveloped the village. Tonight, the usual symphony of cicadas was muted, replaced by an unsettling stillness that pressed heavily on her chest. As she lay in her bed, trying to dissolve the tension with sleep, Lena suddenly awakened to the sound of soft weeping outside her window. Curiosity rubbed against caution. She slipped on her shoes and ventured out into the dark, the wooden floor creaking ominously beneath her weight. A chilling breeze whispered through the trees, rustling the leaves above as she followed the sound of the mournful sobbing. It led her to the edge of the forest that bordered Elderwood, where she stopped short, breath caught in her throat. A flickering light beckoned from within the trees, illuminating a small ceremony taking place. Cloaked, figures encircled the ancient well, their whispered incantations mingling with the howling wind, penetrating the marrow of her bones. Terrified, she turned to flee but found herself frozen, rooted to the damp earth, compelled to witness the grotesque ritual. What had begun as a plea for understanding twisted into a blackened chant that swelled ominously, the ground vibrating beneath her. She caught glimpses of their faces, pale and gaunt, eyes gleaming with an otherworldly hunger. Lena tried to back away, only to stumble, her foot catching on a festering root. The figures turned, their voices rising like a storm, a cacophony of despair and longing, and within that twisted moment, she felt a presence brush against her mind, a whisper, an invocation of fear, as if she too was being summoned towards the well. With every ounce of strength, she tore herself from the grasp of that malevolent force and ran, breath hitching, heart pounding, stumbling through brambles and darkness. Back at the inn, she slammed and bolted the door, listening to the muffled voices recede into the night, a haunting melody echoing in the stillness. Yet sleep would not come. Instead, dread seeped into the corners of her mind. The village's curse, tightening around her like a noose. When dawn broke, she sought to retrace her steps to the well, driven by a need for understanding, for closure. The villagers now echoed grim silence, their faces haggard, their conversations abrupt and filled with an undercurrent of fear. To ask them about the well was to invite more sorrow into the air, tension thick as fog. Yet Lena pressed on, undeterred, feeling the tug of insatiable curiosity as she clutched her notebook. Each turn felt as if she were being led deeper into a labyrinth of darkness. As she approached the well's mouth, her breath quickened. It seemed to grow in size, its depths yawning like a hidden throat. A stench wafted up, a mixture of decay and something sweetly rot-like that curled in her nostrils, beckoning her closer. The atmosphere shifted, shadows lengthening and deepening, almost alive. Desperation clawed at her, and she leaned over the edge, peering deep into the inky abyss, where faint echoes of giggles danced cruelly among the stones. Time twisted as the shadows whispered her name, wrapping around her consciousness like tendrils of smoke. Images flickered, flashes of children playing, their laughter turning sinister as they reached for shimmering toys, only for those bright moments to fizzle into mists of despair. Lena felt a pull, an invisible thread knitting her to those lost souls, to their fate. Each heartbeat synchronized with the remnants of their laughter, a fragrant reminder of innocence sullied. Yet the well was not merely an abyss. It pulsated with life, an entity with a consciousness beyond her understanding, and it called to her with promises wrapped in temptation. She stumbled back, realizing too late how deeply she had become ensnared in the village's underlying dance of despair and loss. The villagers knew the cost, but she, fiddling with fate's delicate strings, had yet to learn. It was in that moment, staring down into the well, that Lena faced her reflection, a hollow specter trapped beneath the surface, her own eyes now glinting with an alien hunger. The veil of normalcy split. She envisioned the curses within those mirthful giggles, felt the echoing dread swell within as she understood. The well demanded a sacrifice each generation, feeding on the unwary dreams of those who sought to bend fate to their will. With terror tightening her throat, Lena stumbled back, but the village had quietly closed in, the air thickening with their own despairing legacy, now keenly aware of her trespass. Each villager's gaze pinned her with an accusing weight, as if they had seen countless others in her place, each meeting the same fate, a fusion of loyalty and betrayal. In their eyes, she was not an outsider. She had become one of them. She felt the darkness closing in, not just around her, but rooting itself within. The laughter of the lost children intensified, a cruel reminder of her own choices, their shared hopes twisted into something far more sinister. In the heart of Elderwood, Lena succumbed to their song, yielding to the abyss and pledging her soul to the well, joining the chorus of forgotten children with the taste of despair lingering on her tongue. As night fell once more, the village resumed its peculiar rhythm, the lanterns flickering against the ink-black sky. Lena was gone, but her presence remained woven into the fabric of Elderwood, a story added to those whispered by the hearth, shared under the breath to warn the stranger, the curious, drawn to the glimmering well of wishes. And just as leaves fall in autumn, Lena's fate would become another fallacy, swallowed by the shadows, lost amid the echoes of laughter that twisted into malevolence, forever sealing her fate with that of the cursed well. The heavy air pressed against Clara as she stepped into the abandoned wards of St. Bartholomew's Hospital, a decrepit relic in the heart of an overgrown urban jungle. A part of her was drawn by the thrill of exploration, but the other whispered warnings woven from the memories of ghosts that lingered. The walls were cloaked in moisture, the scent of mildew curling like sinister fingers around her throat. She had heard the stories of restless spirits and unexplained disappearances, yet curiosity tugged at her, a siren call in the fog of her own turbulent past. As she wandered through the crumbling halls, The dim light from her flashlight flickered, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters on the walls. Each creak of the floorboards beneath her feet sent a chill skittering along her spine. What was once a sanctuary for healing lay now in a morbid stillness, the remnants of lives once lived scattered throughout. Old photographs hung askew on the walls, faces obscured by dust but eyes still watching. Clara steeled herself, pushing deeper into the labyrinth of despair, eager to escape the weight of her own memories. The stories had warned about room 213, whispers of screams echoing from its dark corners, a cold that seeped into the bones. Despite every rational thought pleading with her to turn back, Clara found herself standing before the door, its surface marked by time and neglect. A soft humming filled the air, a melody that was both inviting and eerie, luring her closer. She hesitated only for a moment, heart racing at the thought of what lay beyond. The handle turned with an ominous sigh, and the door creaked open to reveal an expansive view of decay. Inside, the air thickened, heavy like molasses, and the temperature dropped, coiling around Clara like a serpent. The silence pulsed with a life of its own, and the fading remnants of a past filled with pain seemed to envelop her. The walls were adorned with torn medical charts, their yellowed edges flapping gently as if a phantom breeze were stirring the very essence of the room. In the corner, an old bed stood draped in tattered sheets, a sinister offering to the shadows that thrived in its corners. Clara's heart pounded as her fingers brushed against a rusting hospital instrument, an old scalpel that retained an unsettling glimmer. But it wasn't the tools of the past that sent her into a spiral. Rather, it was a sensation, an unmistakable feeling of being watched. As she turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind her, and the comforting silence exploded into a cacophony of whispers, indistinct yet haunting. Each word seemed to claw at her sanity, and she pressed her palms against her ears, desperate to shut them out. Stumbling towards the window, Clara's breath turned shallow, the cold creeping in and tightening around her. She looked out onto the desolate street below, a world fogged by twilight, devoid of any sound or movement. The city had succumbed to decay, each building standing like a tombstone in a graveyard of memories. But she felt that this place was not simply abandoned. It was alive with unseen entities. The whispering grew louder, coiling around her thoughts, urging her to remember, to confront the past that she had run from. Then, in a flash, a figure appeared in the corner of her eye, a shadow moving against the backdrop of crumbling linoleum, as if stitched from the very threads of darkness. Clara spun around, pulse racing, but the room was still, a coffin holding its breath. Broken glass crunched beneath her feet as she backed away, feeling the presence tightening like a noose. It wanted something from her, and the panic in her chest ignited into a wildfire, propelling her toward the door. She gripped the handle, but it slipped from her grasp, as if the room itself had curled its fingers around her, refusing to let go. With a swell of adrenaline, Clara's eyes darted to the dulled mirrors lining the wall, and in one she caught a glimpse, not her reflection, but something far more terrifying. A visage twisted in silent anguish, reaching out with skeletal hands as if pleading for release. Her own reflection flickered back to life, lips moving in a silent scream, a warning from her future self. Paralyzed, she realized the whispers were not merely echoes of the past, but fragments of countless souls trapped, yearning to be freed. The room trembled as Clara felt the walls shift, bending to reveal the chilling truth. The hospital wasn't just a space of neglect. It was a vessel for the forgotten, the lost memories twisted into a nightmarish tapestry woven from pain. Each whisper had a name, a face, a story now entwined with hers, urging her to unravel the sins of abandonment. that lingered in the air thick with sorrow. And then just as suddenly as it began, the whispers crescendoed into a howl, the cacophony rushing towards her in a surge of desperate cries for help. Dozens of faces appeared in the mirrors, eyes wide with terror, mouths agape in a relentless scream. Clara staggered back, her heart pounding so fiercely she feared it might burst. Reality began to warp, blurring the lines between her existence and theirs, as the room twisted into a vortex of memories. She was not merely an intruder. She was now part of their story, entwined in a brutal cycle of fear and loss. The walls closed in, threatening to swallow her whole as her memories resurface. The hospitalized childhood, the nights spent wishing for escape. The last remnants of her sanity slipped through her fingers, replaced by a tide of despair. She was losing herself, becoming one with the shadows, the past pulling her deeper into a void where the real world dissolved into darkness. The whispers now transformed into unending screams, accusations of negligence and abandoning the souls that once dwelled within these chambers. Clara's legs faltered, and she sank to the rotting floor, submerged in guilt for a life she hadn't lived within these walls, but always felt bound to. The silence returned, oppressive yet deceptive, as the screams faded into the backdrop. Clara felt herself slipping away, layered in their despair and hovering on the brink of consciousness. The last thing she perceived was the flickering flashlight illuminating the walls, the dark figures re-emerging, welcoming her into eternal night. As the shadows tightened around her, everything grew dim. And then, nothing. The door to room 213 creaked open, and she was gone, leaving behind the silence of the abandoned hospital, where the whispers continued, now entwined with her name, an echo reverberating in the stillness. Outside, the city had forgotten her, just as it had forgotten the lives once saved within those walls, melding into the chilling embrace of oblivion. No one would come for her now, and as the moon rose high, cloaked in fog, the echoes of St. Bartholomew's would forever linger, waiting for the next curious soul to wander into their embrace. Marissa stood alone in the half-light of her dimly lit apartment, the kind of place where shadows seemed to breathe and shift, stretching long and tattered against peeling wallpaper. The clock ticked steadily, a metronome marking time in a world she felt increasingly detached from. Translucent wisps of fog drifted past the window, twisting and coiling as if trying to reach her. Was it the chill in the air? Or was someone, watching her? The uneasiness gnawed at her insides, a persistent whisper urging her to leave this place behind. Yet the city outside remained a siren's call, familiar yet intimidating, its streets lined with ghosts of unmade choices. It had been a year since she moved into this neglected building on the outskirts of the city, an exodus driven by heartbreak and the sharp sting of betrayal. The relocation had offered no solace. Instead, it sealed her in a cocoon of isolation. The neighbors were as elusive as the sunlight, their presence felt but rarely seen, muffled voices drifting through the walls like relics of forgotten lives. As Marissa explored her own thoughts, she shivered not from the encroaching cold, but from a deep-seated fear that something within these walls was not right. Every creak of the flooring, every rustle of unseen objects set her on edge. Months passed, and her solitude morphed into something more sinister. A series of distortions flickered across her vision, a dark figure darting through her peripheral, the disembodied scent of decay that lingered in the air. Marissa sought normalcy in her work and routines, yet she could feel the boundaries of her sanity fraying. She began collecting stories from her reclusive neighbors, scribbling down their tales of loss and grief, hoping to find meaning in their despair. The more she wrote, the more the walls seemed to pulse as if alive, absorbing her anguish like a sponge. Then came the night she found the antique mirror propped against the wall in the vacant corridor, a magnificent, tarnished frame that whispered of glamour lost to time. Its surface was cracked yet inviting, reflecting not just her likeness but flickers of something darker lurking in the depths, shadows that danced just beyond comprehension. Without hesitation, she dragged the mirror to her apartment, desperate to unearth its secrets. The sole source of light in her darkened room turned dimmer, casting long, distorted reflections that seemed to mock her fragile state. The shadows deepened, replicating her movements with an unsettling delay, like a distorted echo trapped between worlds. As she analyzed the mirror, an urge surged within, urging her to delve deeper. She traced her fingers over its ridges, and, with each stroke, images blurred to life. A small girl laughing and crying, faces receding into the darkness, hands reaching out for something lost. Each night thereafter, she became consumed by the visions, a siren call beckoning her deeper. They twisted her dreams into nightmares, which felt more like memories, replaying over and over like a cruel joke. It was as if the reflective surface was peeling back the layers of her soul, revealing fragments she wished long buried. Her mental state spiraled, fed by lack of sleep and frightening awakenings. At first, she attributed the whispers and muffled cries to her overactive imagination, to the lingering echoes from her past. But reality soon blurred. She could no longer discern between dream and waking life. The pull of the mirror became intoxicating, leading her on nightly trysts filled with echoes of laughter that turned to shrieks and pleas for help. It was a dance of madness, and she was the willing participant, entranced by the slivers of truth hidden behind the glossy surface. The neighbors, once shadows in her life, began to seep into her reality, their distorted faces appearing in her periphery, their eyes hollowed like freshly dug graves. It was as if they were drawn to her plight, witnessing the collapse of her reality with a morbid fascination. Their whispers filled her mind, laced with sinister intent. She felt herself slipping, the mirror becoming a portal, a reflection of the turmoil festering within her. She was changing, becoming something other than herself. The boundaries of what defined her began to dissolve like mist. On the cusp of losing herself entirely, she became obsessed with the little girl in the mirror whose laughter haunted her like a distant memory. A flicker of familiarity ignited her curiosity. Could the child be her lost innocence? The girl needed her, and so Marissa began to reach out, her fingers brushing the surface as if trying to pull the girl to safety. With each movement, the shadows thickened around her, ensnaring her in a web of fear and foreboding. Then, on a stormy night when the winds howled like lost souls, the mirror swallowed her gaze. She watched in horror as the little girl stood in the depths, her smile twisted and cruel, eyes ablaze with a darkness that made Marissa shiver. Was it a warning? A manifestation of her own dread? She recoiled, panic setting in, yet her hand reached forward, compelled by something deeper. And as she made contact with the surface, a shock coursed through her, a connection forged between reality and the malevolent realm behind the glass. Time lost all meaning beyond the mirror's grasp. In that fleeting moment of contact, the world around her rippled, taking on grotesque forms of her fears. The girl was not a victim, but the harbinger of her own darkness, the one she had invited into her life. Desperate, Marissa pulled away, her heart racing as the shadows twisted, writhed, threatening to pull her in. The mirror cracked, splintering like the fragments of her psyche. and she realized too late that the girl was merely a reflection of herself, lost, broken, twisted. In the final throes of realization, she stumbled backward, her grip on sanity splintering, eyes darting around the room. The shadows danced, mockery of her fears, and she could hear the whispers of her neighbors crescendoing into a cacophony of dread. Marissa felt the walls close in, the darkness wrapping itself around her like a lover's embrace, smothering her pleas for escape. With a shattering crash, the antique mirror fell, slicing air with its jagged edges. Yet somehow the girl's laughter filled the void, echoing against the glass. What little remained of Marissa felt consumed by that laughter, a haunting serenade, welcoming her into the void. Alone, she was left to wander the fractured corridors of her mind, an entity trapped amidst shadows and reflections, forever searching for a light that no longer existed. The darkness within swallowed her whole, and when dawn finally broke, her apartment lay silent, the fog long dispersed, leaving only the shrouded essence of a lost soul lingering behind those now closed doors, a grim reminder of her own undoing, forever restless in mirrors where no one gazes back. As dusk settled over the forgotten town of Rivermore, a sullen fog crept between the crumbling buildings, swallowing the remnants of a once thriving community beneath its heavy shroud. Marisol stepped off the bus, her shoes crunching over the gravel, a heart thumping heavily in her chest. This was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to escape the suffocating grasp of an unrelenting city. Instead, the air felt thick with something unnameable, a specter of memories long buried. She drew her coat tighter around herself, shivering against an inexplicable chill that wrapped around her like fingers grasping for her soul. Her family had once lived in Rivermore, a quaint village nestled between dark, encroaching woods and the restless river sable. Tales of her ancestors had always been rooted in laughter and resilience, but now they were just whispers in the recesses of her mind. Buildings stood like tombstones, some leaning and rotting as if mourning their waste. A sinking dread settled in her stomach as she navigated the narrow street, noticing the way the shadows danced in the corners of her vision, urging her to turn back, but her resolve pushed her forward. Marisol found the house that had belonged to her grandparents, its facade adorned with peeling paint and an untamed garden of thorns. As she stepped past the threshold, dust motes spiraled in the air. As stale and forgotten as the memories that enveloped her, the air smelled of earth and decay, and each creak of the floorboards beneath her feet echoed through the silence. Here, the walls bore witness to countless unspoken stories, secrets imbued in every crack and stain. The very atmosphere pulsed, with an unseen energy that prickled at the back of her neck. Night fell swiftly and the silence grew heavy, oppressive like a blanket pressed down on her. Using her phone's flashlight, she scanned the dim rooms, revealing remnants of her family's life. Old photographs coated in a fine layer of dust, faded books on the shelf, and the lingering scent of wood smoke carried on the wind from an extinguished fire. Each flicker of light seemed to stir the shadows, and Marisol caught a glimpse of movement, something just out of sight. She blinked, but it was gone, leaving her with a sense of unease that gnawed at her sanity. As the hours crawled by, she found herself restless, exploring the town, searching for signs of life beyond the desolate shell she had encountered. Only, the cawing of distant ravens filled the air, a cacophony that sent her heart racing. Nearing the edge of the woods, she stumbled across a clearing, an altar of sorts, adorned with shriveled flowers and grim totems made of bark and bone. A chill ran through her. This was no ordinary forest. The trees whispered secrets, their gnarled branches seeming to reach out, beckoning her closer as shadows twisted and shivered in the corners of her vision. Desperate for answers, she sought refuge in the town library the next day, dusty and dimly lit, a mausoleum of knowledge. Porcelain doll faces lined the shelves, but it was the worn, leather-bound book that captured her attention, a journal once belonging to her great-grandmother. The ink bled together in some sections, forming grotesque shapes, but one passage stood out, a warning etched in frantic strokes about the unseen ones that dwelled within the woods. The words burned in her mind, a dark reminder that no one truly left Rivermore. As nighttime descended, the atmosphere shifted, heavy with a sense of impending doom. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows like spirits in an eager frenzy. Restless, she returned to her grandparents' home, feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon her, shadows sliding against the corners. Sleep eluded her. Instead, she wandered, every creak of a floorboard amplifying her anxiety, amplifying the paranoia gnawing at her thoughts until sanity blurred under a veil of dread. Deep into the night, she heard it. A soft whispering, like a wind threading through the trees, luring her to the door. Against her better judgment, she stepped outside. The cold air bit at her skin and fog coiled around her like a viper. The murmurs grew louder, seeping into her consciousness, promising knowledge, power, and the truth of her lineage. She walked toward the woods, entranced, feet moving of their own accord, deeper into the darkness where the trees became thick and menacing. At the edge of the clearing, she dismissed the familiar dread that pooled in her stomach, convinced that facing the unseen ones was her destiny. The altar greeted her, oppressive and ancient, the totems looming like sentinels. She was about to turn away when she brushed against something cold and clammy. It was the touch of a hand, fingers pale and thin entwined with her own. A creature materialized from the shadows. It wasn't human, yet it bore her features, its eyes a dark abyss reflecting her own. Panic ignited within her, but the voice of the creature was a siren's lure, twisting through her mind and weaving tales of sacrifice and reverence. It was an echo of her family's past, of a pact forged in desperation. Marisol felt a sinking realization. She had never truly left Rivermore. It had been waiting, hungry for her return. Her bloodline tethered her to this malevolent cycle, a dance she had unwittingly joined. The shadows in the woods closed in, swallowing her screams as she became one with the whispering night, her consciousness untouched yet irrevocably altered. Days morphed into nights, and the townsfolk murmured about an absence in Rivermore, that the spirits had claimed her as their own. In the town library, the leather-bound journal lay open to a page that spoke of the unseen ones and their thrall, the descendants chosen to serve in silence, haunting the edges of perception, forever drawn back to their fate. As the sun rose, illuminating the fog above the altar, Marisol's laughter rang out, an echo of the town's faded tragic past, stitched into the fabric of the unseen, where all was forgotten and none could escape.